But there are many more important and significant things in life, things even that we as Workday as a company, we're contributing and supporting too, right? It doesn't matter if it is climate or if it is the communities that we live and we support, or if it is providing opportunities to people. So even if you are not on the best mood or this didn't go your way, try to take a step back, try to reflect like we did the best we can. If we didn't do anything right, what can we learn from it? And just keep moving forward.
Today's conversation is with Chano Fernandez. He is the former co-CEO of Workday, an enterprise software company with 17,000 employees that supports 50% of Fortune 500 companies. This episode was actually recorded while Chano was still the co-CEO of Workday, which is a position that he recently stepped away from. So he is no longer the co-CEO of Workday. Chano grew up in one of the poorest regions of Spain, and he has now lived in London for over 10 years. One of the things that I found fascinating from my discussion with Chano is that when he was actually interviewing for Workday, he voluntarily removed himself from the interview process because he didn't think that he had a shot at getting the job. And Workday actually convinced him to stay through, and it's safe to say it ended up being a pretty good choice for him. In today's episode, Chano shares why it's important for you to have a positive attitude, what you need to know about the trend of quiet quitting, why skills are more important and valuable than jobs, which is something that I've talked about for several years now, and what he does and what you can also do to keep developing yourself as a leader. And you won't want to miss the bonus conversation with Chano, where he talks about how to approach solving a problem, building effective teams, and common mistakes that leaders make and how to avoid them. That bonus episode is only available for subscribers of Leading the Future of Work Plus, which is $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year on Apple Podcasts. And when you subscribe, you will get this bonus episode with Chano. You will also get a bonus episode every single week from one of my amazing guests, ad-free listening, and early access to new episodes. And most importantly, you get an opportunity to support the show, which allows me to bring in more amazing guests like Chano. So I hope you decide to subscribe to Leading the Future of Work Plus. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leading the Future of Work. My guest today, Chano Fernandez, the co-CEO of Workday. Chano, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me today, Jacob.
For people not familiar with Workday, can you give a little context around the company? What do you guys do and how many employees do you have?
Sure. So Workday is a software solution provider. We do native cloud applications for finance, human resource, and planning. And we help companies to plan, execute, analyze, and extend on one single solution. We support over 50% of the Fortune 500. And we have today over 17,000 employees, Jacob.
Wow. Okay. So pretty big size company. I'm really curious about your background before we start talking about some of the fun leadership and future of work stuff. So you grew up in Spain, is that right?
That's correct.
So you were born there, raised there. Can you talk a little bit about where and how you grew up in Spain?
Yeah, I would say I grew up pretty happily, low to middle class family in the poorest region of Spain, which is a place called Extremadura, a little bit southwest bordering Portugal. And I lived most of my time in Spain, except the last 10 years that I've been more living out of the UK in London. Studied in public schools and, went to college over there and did a major in physics before starting in consulting, and then really over 25 years in the software world.
Wow. So you said you grew up in one of the poorest areas of Spain?
The poorest one of all them. We have 17 regional governments or communities, I guess, similar to counties here, or maybe states, depending how you want to call it. And it's the poorest of all of them, yeah.
Wow. So can you talk a little bit about what that was like? So when you say poorest regions, when you were growing up, was it hard to find food, shelter? What was the environment like?
No, I think, we were definitely having food, but we would have just covered basic needs, right? That's what I would say. So I didn't enjoy many toys or any kind of luxury at all in terms of access. Certainly, in terms of food or very basic education, I did have that access, but my dad really, was born during the Spanish Civil War. I think he got his first pair of shoes when he was 14 years old, and he's always
Wow.
been a very hard worker. Not much education, but he's a self-made entrepreneur. And I think I'm pretty happy. I learned very strong set of values from my parents. So I didn't grow with much from a material perspective, but I
Yeah.
was pretty happy in terms of what I was taught and what my parents could do the best to procure for ourselves.
When you talk about values from parents, and I can relate. I mean, my parents grew up also quite poor in the former Soviet Union, so I can relate a lot to that. Those stories, the environment. I mean, I personally didn't grow up in that environment, but my parents did, and they've shared a lot about what that
Yeah.
was like. What did that teach you growing up as far as values? Because obviously you became the CEO of a massive organization, and we'll talk about how that happened in just a few minutes. But growing up, what sort of values were instilled in you, even in that kind of a tough environment, and how did that shape who you are as a leader and as a person?
Yeah. Great question. I think, first of all, I was lucky to grow in an environment where you felt love, right? And you felt trust, you felt integrity, you felt humility. And I live with all those things. I'm always kind of is speaking very transparently and speaking the truth and really value and being grateful for the things you have, but also, hard work in
Hmm.
terms of what I was surrounded with. So I think that was again, you need to earn the right for the thing. So that was good, to be honest, in terms of how it has forged me as a person, I would say, going forward.
Yeah. One of the things that and I don't know if there's any science or research on this, but I've talked about this with a few guests who either are immigrants themselves or come from a family of immigrants. And it seems to me that there's a little bit of a different mindset that immigrants have, or people who come from immigrant parents, as far as work ethic, scrappiness, entrepreneurship, just a different way that they think about the world, because growing up, they always had to scrap to survive. So it's a very different mindset. Do you find that at all in some of the people that you work with, that the immigrant mentality is maybe a little bit different
Yeah, I
and
think
also
I
positive?
think definitely there is a correlation. I would say you don't take things for granted, but when you are good set of values in terms of you achieve things together as a team, doing the right things and on the right way, and as I said, with integrity and honesty and and humility, you're pretty much aware of a lot of the things that you still need to learn
Yeah.
and need to understand. But you seeing the value of hard work, as I mentioned before, and that can take you a long way.
Yeah.
But of course, it's hard, right? Yeah, and I see that, as you say, potentially on many of that immigrant community, where people that had just come from backgrounds where things have not been easy, right? Even in my own case, I would say, just Jacob, when you work with in a language that is not even your native language, sometimes you go through episodes where definitely during your career are just not easy to overcome, but you
Mm.
just strive to be the best version of yourself. Right?
Yeah. What was the most difficult moment during your career?
Oh, what a great question.
Like,
Yeah,
was there ever a point where
I
you
guess
thought,
a couple of times feeling where maybe you were in a place where you did not really belong to, or maybe where you were in a place where you were not able to fill in some big shoes, and you were acknowledging some of the gaps that and how much learning you still need to go through, but just being humble about it, being grateful that you were able to recognize those areas that you need to improve and some of those deficiencies. It's just a question of how am I gonna close those gaps and fill it up, and again, I didn't want to put myself any ceiling. Basically, the environment and the context would do that for you. Is just just achieve, as I said before, be the best version of yourself.
Does a particular story or example come to mind when you had that feeling?
Yeah, yeah. Even when before I joined Workday, I was thinking, well, and I really kind of withdrew from the process because I thought that someone process in terms of getting to join the company, because I thought with someone with my background, where I was coming from, and experience potentially would not be the one selected, and potentially would not be the one given the most opportunities within the company. Certainly, history or time has proven that I was wrong, and I'm happy that I decided to continue. But yet that's how I felt at that particular moment in time.
Wow. So you almost withdrew from the entire process of being even considered for the co-CEO role.
I was not really the co-CEO role. It was before I joined the company. So I joined Workday to run the EMEA president, and at that point in time, to run the EMEA region. And at that point in time, because I was more an external and a known quantity, I thought that potentially someone more from native speaking country like the UK, or some with a different background would be considered for that role to run the region, not me. So I heard. And thought through about, and I truly withdrew from the process, and then where they kind of insisted like I should carry on with the conversations. And yeah, that was
Wow.
a good decision in hindsight, right? But
That's actually a really cool story. So can you talk a little bit about so you started the process of recruiting, doing the interviews, and then it sounds like there was a particular point. Was there a moment or a point where you realized, like, why am I doing this? I'm never going to get this job. Like, what made you think that?
well, I guess is one is the big hesitation. I was happy on my previous job, and I was recognized, and I think I had a potential, let's say, career to keep growing there and keep progressing. And this opportunity came, and at some point you just felt like it's clearly an American company at that point in time that is going to have to do a lot of basically still go through in Europe, and internationally, and with a global mindset. Here I am, someone coming from the south of Europe, potentially not one of the most recognized
Yeah.
places, and trying to get into this role. Is it worth it to really spend the time during this process?
Yeah.
Because I don't think I'm going to get there, and they're going to end up selecting someone from either the UK or Northern Europe, or someone that they would feel would be closer to start with an American culture, or
Yeah.
someone to run basically an American company within Europe, right? Again, that was all my perception. Not
Yeah.
always perception is reality, so that has nothing to do with Workday. So yeah, so there was a moment where I say I'm with the person who was talking to Workday, and the recruiter, I'm withdrawing, right? I don't I don't have the time to really spend on all these conversations, and I don't think this is going to work,
Hmm.
right?
Do you know how
And
many
again,
other?
that was all my own insecurities and my own feeling that
Yeah.
I'm not going to be the one selected, so I have all the things to do, and I'm happy where I am. So let's just leave it here.
Do you know how many other people were up for that same job at the time?
There were a number of them. I don't know exactly. You usually don't know the data, but
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
were there were a few of them. Yeah, there were a few of them. Some of them most likely with more the background and the basically from origin and experience that coming from that I'm describing. Yeah.
And so, do you remember the email or the phone call that you sent to Workday at the time, kind of withdrawing? Was it just I'm not a good fit, or was it a
Yeah, I
long?
remember that. Yeah, I was like, I don't think that I'm going to good fit, and I think that this is not going to work. I still will have a number of basically, of course, obviously interviews to go through. Guys, you're gonna not ended up selecting me. I think it's been lovely meeting you, but let's just leave it here,
Yeah.
because I'm also happy where I am, and I think you're gonna, as I said, you're gonna end up selecting someone that is more a native speaker,
Huh.
and potentially is coming more from the Northern Europe, and that you will feel more comfortable too, and closer to to your culture. You feel that it will be more included since day one. And they said, no, no, you shouldn't feel that way. Is there been anything that we said or so that made you feel that way? And I said, no, this is like how I feel. and maybe my perception is wrong at this time, and they push, no, we think you should continue, and you had good chances, and and we really like you. And I said, okay, let's carry on. Hopefully I prove
Huh.
myself to be wrong. I did, though I didn't believe it at that point that I was going to
Yeah,
prove myself to be wrong.
that's such a that's such a fascinating story. So why do you think you got the job? Because you clearly saw yourself at a disadvantage as far as culture, language, background, but the company still hired you, and you ended up becoming the co-CEO of the company. So why do you think you got that role, even though other people had the culture, they had the language? What is it about you that got you the role?
I think, Jacob, honestly, this of course is more to the company to ask, but of course I asked them. But I believe that, going back to the conversation we had on how you grew, and sort of that strong core set of values that, you were raised with. And I'm not saying the other candidates would not have them. I
Yeah.
don't even know who the other candidates were, to be honest, but I think that just came across. And Workday is a
Mm.
company that values that much that culture, our culture, the one we have. So the set of values I grew with, that integrity, that honesty, that being very humble, and that really valuing hard work, and they of course having a lot of energy and passion for it. But I think they appreciated some
Yeah.
of those qualities, that they felt that I would be a good cultural fit, a good cultural ambassador, and it
Mm.
was worthwhile to give me a shot. Right?
Again, I really love that story because I feel like that happens to a lot of people, either entry level employees or mid level leaders moving up, or even top executives, where at some point they get that thought of, there's no way I'm going to get this job. Like, there's so many people who are more talented and more capable than me, but somehow that person ends up getting the job. So, do you see this with other leaders in your company, or just maybe people that you know, when they go through similar thoughts? And what do you tell them when you see that, when you see your leaders, other peers going through that?
I guess it's a great question, right? I guess all of us, we have our vulnerabilities and we have our insecurities at some point in time, and that's normal, right? And uncertainty. So if I see that, and I had those conversations sometimes when, you ask someone to be part of a process for a promotion or a more senior job, and that person will have some, concerns about her or his abilities to fulfill those shoes. Um, if I think they are a good fit, I just try to encourage them to try it out, because if you don't try it out, you will not know.
Yeah.
And you just give yourself the best opportunity you can, right? So if
Yeah.
yeah, so I really try to think about the great fit. You will not know what you don't, what the outcome will be if you don't give it a shot and you don't try out.
The flip side of that is also, I think, something people struggle with is they say, I did try and it didn't work out, so I should never try again. So, for example, in your
Yeah.
case, let's say you did go through that interview process and they said, Chano, thank you so much for your time. We know we told you to continue with the process, but unfortunately, we ended up going with somebody else. What do you think that would have done to you, and would that have kept you from trying to get other opportunities in the future?
It's a great question, Jacob. And of course, I've been on processes, one or two where, there was someone else selected, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think there you need to be humble and you need to take the learning experience, right? You
Mm.
need to take the feedback. Um, you, I mean, it definitely would be wrong for you to say this is just because I was expecting it and where I come from and so on and so forth. More than A, you need to recognize that is someone else that is a better fit, at this point in time, and that's completely fair. And secondly, what you need to do, and I've done it when I've not been the one selected, and I can think on at least one clear occasion. You need to try to understand why. Where were your shortcomings?
Yeah.
What could you have done differently, or where are the gaps or areas where you need to improve, and prepare yourself for the next one? So accept it, and acceptance sometimes is hard.
Yeah.
Learn, and keep moving on, right?
Yeah.
You never know. There might be other opportunities that just might be even better down the road. So take it with a positive attitude and a growth mindset attitude.
So that has happened to you where you've been up for a
That
role.
has happened to me. Yeah, that's happened
Yeah.
to me. Yeah, of course.
Well, I suppose it's happened to a lot of people, and it's very easy to get discouraged and beaten down. But like you said, when you have that growth mindset of, and it is hard. to take a step back and kind of examine, why didn't I get this? What can I do to improve? How am I going to get it next time? It's not an easy thing for people to do.
Mhm.
I read that you worked at McKinsey in the 90s, so going way
Mhm.
back. I'm curious, what was work like in the 90s? So when you compare work today with work in the 90s, obviously a very different world. I mean, I imagine McKinsey in the 90s of like suit and tie, everyone's professional, like very conservative kind of organization. Is that what it was like back then?
Suit and tie, you describe it very properly, right? Suit and tie, very conservative organization, very hardworking, right?
Yeah.
I was on a project during 6 months where I think I only have 2 weekends free, and that was including, Saturdays and Sundays.
Wow.
Again, I wouldn't say that's the norm on all the projects. I don't, don't get me wrong. But yeah, but it was hard work, right? So spent a lot of time away from home, Monday to Friday, and including weekends. Either outside of Spain, working on projects in other countries. But it was a fantastic learning experience. You had
Mm.
the opportunity to work with, great people, both from a human perspective and from an IQ perspective, and great learning school. But yeah, pretty different than today, right? Even from
Yeah.
I was just smiling because even from a technology perspective, it has nothing to do with how we do things today and how we work today, which is
Yeah, yeah,
much
yeah.
more efficient than it was in the 90s, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, right? You didn't have the laptops, no cell phones, where people like were paging you. You had to give the number of a secretary, probably. It's a very, very different world. Um, did you get any formal leadership training back then, or did you have to just figure things out on your own?
No, we got formal leadership training, right? In that case, I think at that point in time, at the beginning of the career, was more training for some particular skills, right? Or
Ah, okay.
that, but I always believe that there is a great learning on the job. Part
Hmm.
of it, you need to get training. Don't get me wrong, but learning on the job is so important, right? And then I think I always like to be an observer of the game. So you see people in action, and then go and reflect. What do I think that person does tremendously well, and what maybe I think that I don't think that person has done so well
Mm.
from senior leaders, and then what fits to you and what it doesn't. Because sometimes you might be seeing someone that does particular things so well, but then it doesn't really fit to you. It doesn't make you to be authentic, um, then I don't like that. Is you
Yeah.
gotta try to do things that doesn't break your authenticity. I think
Mm.
because that's at least that's how I think you portray yourself. That's how you come across as a person, right?
Yeah. You talked about working hard. And back then, 6-month project, you didn't have very many weekends free. It seems like if that happened today, people would freak out. Do you think that employees today are not willing or wanting to work as hard as they did in the 70s, 80s, 90s?
I think, Jacob, today people are working really hard as well. It's just that they're working more efficiently and more productive, right? And I guess if we could have worked those days how we're working today, maybe I'm sure that some of those weekends would have been avoided. I
Mm.
believe people today are working pretty hard as well. Yeah, there is potentially a further demand for more flexibility, but I think that that's right. If you ask me, at that point in time, I don't think it was that much healthy in terms of the work-life balance, right? We were
Yeah.
having these discussions in terms of, is work-life balance structural, or is it something that we can solve for, right? And many point that those times in the 90s, it was more structural, and we were not solving for. And sometimes we didn't have the right prioritization set, right? I think having a good, healthy balance between taking good care of yourself, taking good care of your family, at the same time that, of course, you are responsible at work, will get the best out of you as a person. So it's
Yeah.
not always a question of you need to be working 16 hours a day as we were working on the 90s. I don't think that, not
Yeah.
necessarily you are more productive.
Yeah, and you bring up, I think, a very interesting point, right? Taking care of yourself, your family. Can you share anything like, do you have any rituals or practices that you do to maintain, being present, not getting burned out? Like, what does a typical day look like for you, and how do you make sure that you still take care of yourself and, do the things that you want to do?
Yeah. I think taking care of yourself, as you say, and well-being is super important because it keeps you fresh. And it keeps you, coming with the best in terms of what you can give to your job, right? So what I do, I mean, when I'm at home and I spend a lot of time on the road, and necessarily they are not the most consistent, I like just to do training. I do kickboxing, I do Muay Thai. That really gives me a lot of energy, right? And then
Wow.
I like to do dancing. So I dance twice a week when I'm at home with my wife. We do either salsa or we do modern dancing. We alternate between one and the other, right? And we
Wow.
do some classes there. So I'm kind of not maybe the most normal one in terms of what you do, but those things really, freshen me up. And what a normal day look like, it's a mix, right? I spend a lot of time with customers and prospects because that's part of my job, and honestly, I learned a lot from them. Spend a lot of time on, or you spend quite good time on internal meetings, and then you spend time as well with partners. Obviously, yeah, I always try to ensure that I have enough time to think and reflect, right?
Hmm.
I think either about a strategy or reflect on what's going on in the company. Yeah, so it's a mix, but customers, prospects, internal meetings, partners, obviously sometimes media, investors, and other conferences also kind of fulfill up the time.
Yeah. Speaking of dancing, I heard that you also dance with employees. So, at conferences, sometimes you might be on the dance floor with all your employees there. And I think it's kind of a broader metaphor, right? Of not just dancing with your employees, but kind of being with them. And oftentimes leaders get very uncomfortable with that, especially CEOs. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on why do that? Like, why be with your people? Why dance with them? Why, I mean, what if you make a fool of yourself and people think you can't dance? Like, why put yourself out there like that as the CEO?
I would say I'm just another workmate, honestly. And I see any of our employees as they are just my peers and they are just my colleagues. And I just have fun. So if I'm on these sometimes some of these conferences where either internal ones where we have, I don't know, our sales kickoff meeting or our customer conferences, and I'm with employees, and of course we spend so much time talking about work and meetings, and so that if we have an opportunity in the evenings, just to dance and just to enjoy a little bit. And most of those times, and get to do it with the younger ones or the youngest ones, right? And that gives you so much energy back that I really love it. So it's not like I'm doing it because I feel that I need to do it or that will make me feel cool. I'm doing it because I love doing it, and I'm really grateful that they're spending time with me and giving me energy back, and we're having a good time together. That's all, right? And honestly, we
Yeah.
spend enough time talking about work. So fun is one of our core values. People will express it differently. I love to express it that way because, I love dancing.
Yeah. I love that. Um, I'm really curious and interested, and I'm sure people would be interested that, obviously when I introduced you, I said co-CEO. So you have a co-CEO structure. Why the co-CEO structure? And do you think this is something that can be applied not just for CEO roles, but just kind of like any leadership role? Like, can you have co-SVPs, co-directors? What does that relationship look like, and why have it?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. I guess I would focus the answer more around the co-CEO, right? I think, the CEO role is a bit of lonely role many times, or many
Yeah.
senior roles, right? So I think and there are many things obviously that you cannot share with anyone else. So having the opportunity to discuss with someone else things that you can't discuss with anyone else in the company is great, because it takes
Yeah.
some of the burden, I would say, outside of your shoulder on that you can't share with someone. I don't think it is a role that, I wouldn't be the one saying it's an easy one, and it is for every organization. And of course, you see more and more. You see them on
Yep.
technology, you see them on, financial services firms, and so on and so forth. But I believe that there are a number of characteristics or criteria that are necessary to be in place in order to make it work. The
Mm.
first one I would say, Jacob, is, there's got to be trust. There's gotta be no ego, or call it generosity, because of course there are things you're gonna have to discuss, where you might have a different points of views, and that's fine. At the end of the day, we all try to do and you don't come to the conclusion what's the best for the company, right? It's good when you have complementary skills. and it's good to have clear side of areas of responsibilities. And I think with that criteria is in place, and we certainly have that criteria in place at Workday, it can work, and it can work pretty nicely.
Yeah.
And there is a good opportunity sometimes for divide and conquer, right? So we Anil and I divide and conquer a lot, and I think we cover lots of ground and territory having it structured this way.
You mentioned that a leadership role, a CEO role, and any probably senior role could be pretty lonely. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. Like a lot of employees, either entry, mid, or maybe even some leadership roles, don't realize that being a top or a senior executive can be a very lonely role. Can you expand on that a little bit and share why is that a lonely role? And I mean, do you have any stories or examples that come to mind of when you felt lonely in that role?
Yeah. Um, yeah, let me think about it. Obviously, as I said before, there are a number of things that you are thinking about that will be impacting either the strategy of the company or the organization of the company, or so that you're thinking about them. No decisions
Yeah.
have been made. You have to watch out, and you can just not be talking about them because there are impacts and there are people implications, and again you need to reflect and be certain before you start communicating, obviously, right? The you know Again, some people may see you that because now you have a more senior role. In a senior role, might be less approachable, or you are super busy, so people would be maybe
Mm,
sometimes less authentic on the way they are either you know approaching to you or
yeah.
communicating with you, or being too much respectful or jealous, or the way they're interacting with you, and it changes a little bit, and you notice that, not necessarily that you want that to happen, but you notice
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a number of these things. I don't think, hopefully I would like to think that people see me that way, that I have changed much, or almost I not changed at all. But the relationship that some people and how they see you just because you have a different responsibility or a different business card right now may see you a little bit different and behave a bit different with you, which might create a bit more distance than maybe
Yeah.
sometimes you would like to have.
Yeah, I've heard that quite a bit, and that can make it tough, right? Because you don't really have many people to go to talk about it. Probably your spouse, your significant other, but besides that, it's people forget that part of what is so important when you're working is to have peers and people that you can confide in and share and have open dialogue with, and sometimes very senior executives don't always have that, and it could be pretty challenging. You mentioned having disagreements. Is there a story you can share? Or first, have you ever had a disagreement with your co-CEO? And uh, is there anything you can share about that and what the disagreement was about? How did you guys get past it? And how big, I mean, were you guys like throwing stuff at each other, cursing, like, I hate you, you're an idiot? Like how intense are these disagreements?
No, I can say that we do have different points of views sometimes about things. I call it that we agree that we disagree, but we never threw things to each other. We never shouted to each other. Trust me, we are very respectful. And as far as we speak up with respect, which is again what we're trying to inculcate within the organization, that is a good and healthy conversation to have and to
Yeah.
take place, right? So sometimes it can be in any particular topic. Like we just may have a different view in terms of, I don't know, what the investments priorities are for next year, and we may agree on two out of the three. We may not agree on the third one, where we may have different views, and we just say we agree that we disagree. Let's try to go and get more data on this one. We like to do a
Mm.
lot of data-driven decision. So whenever we get to that situation and can be a much more objective and data-driven decision, what we agree is let's go and further analyze and let's see what makes more sense. And then again, if you're generous, you have no ego. We are here to do the right things for the company. We're here to make Workday successful for the future. So that's great, right? So let's just do that. And we had the follow up conversation, and we just make a decision. When we make a decision, we just move on, right? Sometimes he's usually more times right than me, because he's just much smarter than me. But but from time to time, I kind of ended up being right. Honestly, I couldn't care less. It's what's right for Workday. It's not what's right for
Yeah.
me or what's right for him.
Do you guys ever get to a point where you just don't agree? The data is different, and you just come to an impasse, and it's like, well, I don't want to do that, and I don't want to do that. Do you bring in other people to help make a decision, or have you always been able to come to some sort of a resolution?
So far, we're always being able to come to some sort of resolution. And yes, of course,
Okay.
it's not just, Anil and I managing the company. We have a great executive committee team, and we had a great senior management team. And they're also, they're also managing the company. They're also making decisions that are very significant to us as a company. So we are not on this alone.
Yeah. One of the other things that I know is very important to you is this idea of having a good attitude for work. Sometimes that's hard to do, right? Sometimes, I don't know, maybe you failed at something, maybe your leader is telling you you're not doing a good job. How do you have a good attitude? And do you need to actually have a good attitude all the time, even when things aren't going well?
I tend to have a positive attitude,
Okay.
see the glass half full. And yeah, even when things are not going well, and of course you could say we also had, I don't know, quarters or maybe sales are not where you would like them to be. But at the end of the day, you ask yourself this simple question: is having a bad attitude, or is me being a little bit more grumpy or more depressed going to change anything? Most likely, what is going to happen is going to make you take worse decisions. With that, I'm not saying that you will not have a bad day. Everybody will have a bad day. But I try to, take a step back and try to see the positive side of life. And maybe, what we do is very important, don't get me wrong, in terms of managing a business. But there are many more important and significant things in life, things even that we as Worthy as a company, we're contributing and supporting too, right? It doesn't matter if it is climate or if it is the communities that we live and we support, or if it is providing opportunities to people. So even if you are not on the best mood, or this didn't go your way, try to take a step back, try to reflect like we did the best we can. If we didn't do anything right, what can we learn from it? And just keep moving forward, right?
Yeah.
And so I try to minimize that moment in terms of if you're having a bad attitude, how long that moment can be, right? And then I think as
Okay.
leaders, it's very important that you know and you realize that you are continuously watch and observe, and of course you need to be
Yeah.
authentic, but you need to understand how much are you passing down in terms of either you not being happy, or and what is that gonna mean, and how is that gonna impact people, and is that gonna get the best out of your teams, or is it not? So just be mindful of that is important. Of course, on one-to-one, many of my direct reports are friends, and we share a lot. I try to keep a positive attitude, and there is a lot to be grateful for, to be honest, when you look at what's going on in the world.
So you said you share a lot. How open and vulnerable are you with your team? Do you wear your heart on your sleeve and just share anything and everything? Are you more focused on sharing work related issues like mistakes and failures? Like how open and vulnerable are you really?
I think if you ask me, I overshare potentially too much, right? It's not that I take everything out of my chest, because I don't. Again, things that will not be helpful, but I'm a believer in transparency. A believer in, we're doing business with workmates, but if we can also be friends, that would be great. That does not mean that you have to be close friends with everyone you work with, but of course we spend a lot of time doing business, so try to create a trust environment. So I, even on when I make decisions, I am usually providing a lot of context on what I make the decision, that I make, and what was based upon. Again, even on an oversharing exercise, but also to try to learn if there is feedback that they would like to give me.
Yeah.
Like, I think, I don't concur or agree with you on this particular matter, or I think you went wrong here or there. So I try to share context. So yeah, I overshare. I'm not saying
Anyway,
that is. I'm not saying that is an. That is I'm super happy about. Sometimes I should share less, but I tend to share a lot. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What do you think about when nobody else is around? So when you're, it's late at night and you're laying in bed, or it's the morning, or you're in your office alone and it's quiet. What are the thoughts that you have?
Yeah, those are moments where you usually think and reflect, as I said before, in terms of the strategy of the company, in terms of the are we really focusing and executing on our priorities? What are the things that are not working, and if they're not working, what could we do about it? Who are the people that potentially are struggling or having a tough time, and if they are, what can we do about it, and what we should be doing? What those are the moments where I would say they are not the most structured thoughts in terms of this is the cases
Yeah.
that I do have, but you tend to think either go and look at what happened this week, what is going to happen next week, and what's going on overall on the company, and what can you do to make things better, and whatever that looks like.
How do you quiet your mind when you need to? Because it seems like you can have a lot of thoughts, and the thoughts could be never ending. And those thoughts could maybe keep you from sleeping. I've heard lots of stories for leaders who, they get anxious. I've had CEOs tell me that they've had panic attacks before, that they've had severe anxiety, that they couldn't sleep. One CEO of a bank was telling me that for like 3 days he couldn't sleep because his head was just so many thoughts. So how do you quiet your mind and stay present and not let all these thoughts just take over all the time?
What a great question. Um, I have a great partner, my wife, and yeah, she's the person with whom I will be sharing everything. Well, everything that is not, confidential business information. Let's be clear, right? But kind of
Yeah.
everything in terms of those feelings, or in terms of how am I doing, or what I think I'm struggling, what's going on with me. So that helps, because she of course she knows me. She's the person that knows me best in the world, and she provides
Yeah.
great guidance, right? Um, Sometimes, but I'm not very constant. I do meditation, but I'm not really constant on it. I'm not the person that does it every single day. But sometimes, you feel that you need it, and you do it. Yeah, and then I try to be very pragmatic, and try to really understand the things that I cannot influence and cannot change. Like, there's not much I can do now about what's going on in the macro. Of course, there is something that I can impact, but but what I need to focus is on the things that I can control, and the things that I can act upon.
Yeah.
What's going on my company, right? So I try to not overheat myself with stress. Um, yeah, I think I've done a decent job around that. So that's what I would do.
Yeah. Having that supportive partner. I mean, my wife does the same thing for me too. And I like to think I do the same thing for her, but yeah, I mean, it can be hard, right? I mean, we spend a lot of time working, and sometimes the thoughts just don't stop, and it can be pretty tough to get them to be quiet. Um, One last thing I wanted to touch on before we jump into some action items for leaders out there is around this notion of skills versus jobs. And for many, many years, we used to focus on the job, the job description. And now I think we're moving towards this idea of focusing on skills that people have. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why that's so important? And is that something that you are a believer in as well?
I'm a huge believer, Jacob. I think, and let me tell you why, right? I believe skills are the foundation of the future of work and the future of talent. I believe that, focusing on skills as well opens great opportunities for diverse pool of talents, and investing on those. So, and that will make, again, companies richer from a point of view perspective, and providing opportunities, to talent that we couldn't provide before. I believe that identifying the right skills for the right jobs will help us to put the people on the places where they can succeed the best, right? And also, understanding what are the skills we need and the other skill we need to do on people to make them successful on particular jobs, and we're going to provide those. And at Workday, we provide these gig or short-term opportunities. Imagine a salesperson that could get a better understanding of what happens in the marketing before he gets a sales lead opportunity, and could work on a short-term opportunity marketing to understand that part of the process will just make it better, that person, in terms of connecting and collaborating with the peers as going forward. So I'm a true believer for all the reasons that I just mentioned to you, right?
Yeah.
That skills is the right way to go. I think it's not been easy before, and still we're at the beginning of the journey, Jacob. Let's be clear, because especially with large companies and opportunities, you need technology in terms of helping out to scale up those skills and really do the proper matching with some of the career opportunities, right? But it's the right way to go.
The conversation continues with Chano Fernandez for subscribers of Leading the Future of Work Plus, and you won't want to miss this bonus episode with Chano, where he talks about how to approach solving a problem, building effective teams, and the common mistakes that leaders make and how to avoid them. Leading the Future of Work Plus is only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year. And remember, when you subscribe, you get access to a bonus episode every week, ad-free listening, and early access to new episodes. I hope you decide to subscribe, and I'll see you next week.